So where are we with this? Well, I've got it all back together pretty much, but I better show you how I did it. Okay, let's get some of this back together. Take some molybdenum paste and just run it through the spindle of this shutter release. And that drops in that way. That long arm points down this way. Then put the screw on the top and run that down. That should be moving nice and smoothly. That's good. Next thing, this spring. This spring gets tucked in under there, like that. This arm here drops on there. Now the tail of this spring needs to be pulled all the way forward and hooked into here. Now that is awkward. We almost had it then. Like that. Now the spring's not seated correctly around the centre here because it's all misshapen. It doesn't sit there very well. But with a bit of pushing and shoving, here, that just suddenly seated. So now that arm is seated, the spring is seated round it, and the release works like this. This is the catch that holds the thing in the cocked position. And we can put a little wipe of molybdenum paste on that edge there. Graphite grease if you haven't got molybdenum paste. So, a few more pieces. This shaft, this is the cocking shaft. I'll just put a touch of molybdenum paste on that and we'll drop that straight in there. Let's get these pieces back in. Right, so this piece here is the main spring, or one of the two main springs. Its pivot is here. This doesn't really move at any great speed, so you probably really don't need to lubricate that, but I'm going to put some molybdenum paste on that. Drop that over its shaft, stretch that spring out and get it over that post. It's one of those things that's easier said than done, but actually it'll go easy enough. You've just sort of got to hold your mouth right. This is our piece that I refer to as the internal cocking rack with shutters. I'm going to wipe around the inside of that with some molybdenum paste and wipe around the outside. There's about 3 or 4 little different projections there that do clever little things. That thing there, I don't really know what that does, but I'm going to wipe that. Now the spring has to hook into this hole here. Of course you don't want this distorted or twisted, so take note of which way this thing's sitting, so it's sitting even and level. I'll feed that spring through that hole. At least that's the idea. And rotate this into position. Now this is catching on that speed train pawl. I'll pull that back out of the way. And I should be able to drop this into position in the shutter. Okay, so that's sitting in the rest position there. Oh, well, it was. Back where we were. Not my day, is it? That's in the cocked position at the moment. That's a bit dangerous. Let's just release that. That's the run-down position. Let's get this little pawl and this pinion in place. Let's put a touch of molybdenum paste on the top of that shaft. I don't think there's enough movement between this and the pinion for that to actually make any difference, but it can't hurt. Pop that little thing in place. There you are. Is it like a ticking time bomb, or will it stay where it's put? It's looking pretty good at the moment. Let's put the top, the speed settings cam plate in position. I'll give this plate a wipe with some molybdenum, with naphtha, to remove all the old lubricant and rubbish and dust that's attracted. Take some molybdenum paste, put a wipe around the centre, and these lumps and bumps of the speed cam here, I'm giving them a wipe with molybdenum paste, and these other two spots over here. Now the beveled side should be up. Our speed cam here needs to come up through one of these holes. There's a good spot there. Just turn that, make sure everything looks like it's moving. You can see this tiny little, this cam here that lifts the pallets out of play. That's sitting up there. That's all moving nicely. Now, if this was a contour shutter, there'd be a retaining ring on the front there, and I'd be tightening that up. Let's set this to about, you can see the speed cam there, so about here, well, this thing will drop in at about there, will be about 1 second. This should be the 1 second speed. So I'm going to cock the shutter. Our release is over here on the side of the case. Let's see what we get. That looked pretty good to me. I haven't adjusted any speeds on this shutter. I may well not have to do that at all. I'll test it before I do anything else. Here's the front plate. Let's put that on. Why I need this is that it's got the speeds marked on it, and I might be able to tell what I've got things set to. Otherwise I'd be guessing. Right, this will only go on in one position, and this post here comes up through that square hole there, and that locates it so that the speed, the ring with the numbers on, can't twist from the shutter. It's going to stay in the same place each time. So if we've got our alignment marks here on the speed setting ring here, there's a big notch right there. It doesn't have a red mark on it or anything useful to help you find it. It looks like it might have done at one stage. If I set that to 1/10 of a second and cock the shutter, it should be something like 1/10 of a second. I should be able to tell whether that's reasonable or completely ridiculous. Let's try it. Yeah, that's possibly fairly good. So on the strength of that, I might put the centre lens group in place, because that'll hold my front ring in place and stop the shutter falling to bits on me while I'm trying to test it. And go to my shutter tester and test it and see what we've got. We've got no self-timer to worry about on this shutter. Let's see what the other speeds are like. If there's anything else here that I can reasonably judge from experience. 25th of a second, that's pushing it. I would have said that was a bit fast, to tell the truth. I'll know shortly when I test this. And I said earlier that on that retard gear train, it looked like you could adjust the speeds by moving that little lever across. I think that's quite likely the case. 50th of a second. Yeah, I think that's fast. For the fastest speeds, it's really hard to tell, particularly because of the way the shutter's constructed. It's difficult to know what the effective speed would be. 1/5 of a second, what have we got for that? Now that sounded more reasonable to me. Alright, I'll clean the centre group, which means I've got to get all the grease out of there, because it's been where the front element screws into it, that's got a lot of grease and stuff in it, and it's probably gathered up a lot of dust and dirt. I want that grease out because I don't want to spread any of that to the glass surfaces, because once you get grease on glass, it's very hard to see the back of it. And wiping around the outside where that screws in, and wiping around that surface where it faces the shutter blades. And you know, so much came off on the cotton bud there that there's certainly greasy contaminants about waiting to cause me grief. That's a bit better. I'll clean that inner surface of that glass, because I might not need to come back in here. I suspect I will. So using some domestic glass cleaner, I'll just clean that surface. Because if I screw this in place and don't need to come back in, I won't need to clean that surface again. Let's put that in place. It's got a satisfyingly dry sound to that thread as it goes in. Now, unlike the decal shutters on the other retinettes, this one, its notches here don't extend all the way across the front. They're only coming from the outside edge instead of being straight down from the top. That means that when you engage your tool, the only thing you're likely to damage is the outside edge, not the edge with the thread in the middle of it where you're going to screw the front group. So this sort of arrangement is to be preferred because you're less likely to damage the internal thread and make it difficult to get your front element to screw in. Okay, I've got that shutter now to the point where I can take that away to my shutter tester and test it. Of course, my shutter tester is marked in the more common modern speeds of 1, half, quarter, eighth, 15th, 30th, 60th, 125 and 250 and 500th and 1000th. It's not marked like this, so I'll have to just judge that as best I can. But the shutter itself certainly works very well. I just suspect that it runs a bit quick. Well, as you can see, I've got it apart again. The slow speeds were very good. They were right on target, but the faster speeds, everything basically from a 25th and up, was slow. So I've had a look at the speed adjustment there, and this adjustment here, we don't need to tackle that. That only changes the slow speeds because it sets the limit at which the pallets will drop back in. Now that sits in that place through all speeds up to a 25th, and once you set it for a 25th, this starts getting lifted off that stop. And our problem with speeds are from 1/25th and up. So it tells me that the position of that stop's fine because the slow speeds are fine, but our fast speeds are slow. So looking at that, let's just pop this in place. So as you come around to the faster speeds, and this is really 25th and up, this is lifting back out of the way. It's lifting up, reducing the contact of the pallets. We need that to lift up more. So what we need to do, the pin here, you can bend it. I can see it's bent at the moment and it's bent out. Now bending that out allows this thing to move inwards, which would create more drag and slow the shutter down. So if we bend that pin up upright, there's a very good chance that the shutter will work correctly. So what I'm going to do is find a hollow punch in my staking set that fits neatly on that pin, and then just pull it upright and then reassemble the shutter and go and check and see what sort of result I get. Well, I've found a hollow punch which is a fairly good match for that. So I'll fit that on there, and all I'm going to do is lean it over a bit to pull that pin more vertical. Which should mean that it lifts higher and disengages the pallets to some extent, which will speed up the running of the shutter. I don't know how much of a change I need to make to that. I'll find out. I'll reassemble this, put it back together, and check to see what sort of result I've got from there. Well, to bring you up to speed, I bent that pin in. I was still over a full stop slow on the fast speeds. I decided I couldn't bend that pin in anymore. So I looked to my speed train here, and there are the spring that controls this action, the resistance of it. There were 3 available positions for that, and it was in the furthest away, or actually it's 4 really if you take that one into account, but it had a greater tension there than I think it really required. So what I did was I lifted that spring off its post here and moved it over to the next one, which reduced the resistance of the speed train. And then I checked my speeds, and my speeds are currently 1/2 stop slow, and it's consistent between the 250th speed and the 50th speed. So I'm going to move that spring even further over to the next stop and check my timing again. If I get the fast speeds correct, by reducing the resistance here, it may be that I need to apply more resistance by moving this stop to control the slow speeds. But I don't know that yet for sure. That's something I'll have to discover by experimentation. Well, it's a week since I last looked at this shutter. I've been busy doing other things. And I've got it running consistently about 1/2 stop slow at the moment. Now I've been fairly reluctant to shift that pin until now because I knew it would have a major effect on the slow speeds. But now I think I can't get any more adjustment out of that than I've currently got. Doing the changes I've made, what I'm going to do, I've looked at this pin and that's certainly bent outwards. Now that would have the effect of allowing the speed train here to come in closer for greater engagement, if you like, and that would slow the shutter up. If I bend that pin inwards, that will force this out and speed the shutter up. And that's what I need to achieve, is speed the shutter up. So what I'm going to do is bend this pin inwards and then adjust my slow speeds by changing the position of this stop here, which controls how much the pallets drop in for engagement there on the slow speeds. So that's the next thing to try. I'd like to get it closer than 1/2 stop's not bad for an old shutter, but I think I can get it closer than that. At the moment, when I look at this and my speeds are, say, the 250th one, well, that's a little bit faster than 125th, for example. Where it's marked at 100, you could regard that as a 60th, and where it's marked at the 50th, you could regard that as a 30th. And the 25th is closer to a 20th. The slow speeds are quite good. So you could certainly use it, taking those sorts of approximations into account, and 1/2 stop's not an awful lot, not with a modern film with good exposure latitude. But I want to get it a bit closer than that. So I'll get my hollow punch again and I will bend that pin slightly inwards, reassemble it and test it once more. I'm concentrating now on getting the faster speeds correct, because if I can get the faster speeds more accurate, I know that by playing with this adjustment here, I can change the speeds on the slow end of the chain. So that's what I'm about to do. Well, regardless of the adjustments I've made, I'm unable to get the fast speed to get to a 2/50th of a second. I would say it's closer to a 1/50th of a second. It's certainly in that ballpark, somewhere between 1/50th and a 1/200th, I would say. That's probably as close as I'm ever going to get it. And of course what I don't know is how accurate it would have been when it was new, because there was always an element of exaggeration, if you like, by the manufacturers in how fast their top shutter speed actually was in practice. Generally speaking, it's very difficult to get the shutters to produce their marked fast speed, even if you have a freshly serviced shutter, even if it's a new old stock shutter, and even when you fit it with a new spring. So there was always a bit of exaggeration there. I don't think they worried too much about that in the old days. So what am I going to do with this now? Well, I'm just going to clean the lenses, put them back in, the centre group here and the rear group, and then this can be mounted back on the body, and then I can check the focus, and then we can look at the camera bodies. I'm ready to put this back in the camera. You'll notice that this rear group here, the paint on it is quite marked. That's black for a reason. It's black to prevent stray light from reflecting back off that surface and onto the film. So I've just used a marker pen to blacken those out. That'll suffice. It's far better than nothing. You can use matte black paint if you so desired. There's all sorts of different varieties available. Right, so putting the case back on this. Well, our shutter release connection connects here, and it connects via this little piece, which just sits on there like that. And the arm from the shutter release sits in this gap and moves it that way. I'm not expecting any excitement here. I'm just putting a little wipe of molybdenum paste there because that's what I've got, just to make sure there's no friction at that point. And here's the case, and I'll put the case in place, and you can see which way it goes because there's this little cutout here which obviously goes around the flash connection. That just hooks on there like that. We've got the alignment stud here poking out the back. That can go on the camera body. Now I have no shims here to worry about. Let's have a look at the state of this. The cocking action, well, here's our shutter release obviously, you can see how that moves up and down. Our cocking action happens here, and as you cock the film advance, this piece rotates anti-clockwise. So it's in its neutral position or start position here, that D shape, the flat is at the top. That must match the shaft here on the back of the shutter. This tends to float when it's cocked. What's it like when it's uncocked? Let's find out. See if I can press that release. No. Oh, now it's cocked. Yeah, that tends to float about. I've got that cocked, I've got that rotated. If I go fully anti-clockwise, then rotate it till the flat is at the top. Hopefully that'll couple with this piece here. Let's see if we can get this in. It's not easy to get that in place. Hang on, it's just dropped in. The shutter release certainly works, and the cocking, that works too. So that's in correctly and ready to go. That only leaves me my retaining ring to put in place here, which is this one, aluminium. Aluminium's always entertaining to try and screw aluminium to aluminium. So I've got to try and get this retaining ring started here. I'm just using the tip of a screwdriver to help me do that. Is my shutter seated correctly? It appears to be. Certainly cocks and releases nicely. It's not that retaining ring's just not starting correctly. It's gone tight, but the shutter's not tight in the housing. I think there's very little clearance between the outside of that rear lens group and the inside of the retaining ring. Now it's screwing in now, but that's what the problem is. There's insufficient clearance there really, which means that it's hard to get the retaining ring to start and run down smoothly, because the rear lens group has got quite a pronounced serrated edge to it. That yeah, it's just not a nice feel. Aluminium on aluminium. Let's see what that lens is like now. Yeah, that's pretty much taken up all that slack. So I need to tighten that. What did I use? Yes, that retaining ring spanner does tighten it up nicely. Okay, that's the shutter back in the camera. It only remains now to adjust the focus. And I'm sure you've seen me do this 100 times, so I'm not going to bother doing it again now. Basically the procedure is the same. Set the shutter to B. Set the aperture to maximum, f3.5 in this case. Cock the shutter. Put your cable release in the cable release socket at the top. And the cable release I've got's got a lock on it, so when I press it, it stays down. In other words, the shutter stays open. With the shutter open, put my focusing screen on the back here, sitting on the rails. Using a loop, a jeweler's loop, and a suitable focus target. I've got power poles sitting on the horizon out the window to my right. Adjust the focus of the front lens until that target is sharp. It's at its sharpest point at the end. And at that stage we can be confident that the lens is focused to infinity. Take the focus scale ring, note the infinity mark at the top, drop the focus scale ring over the lens, move it round till it hits the infinity stop. Tighten the 3 screws and the job is done. So that's what I'll be doing with that, but I'm not doing that at the moment because I'll be taking this lens and shutter back out of this camera to service the camera body. I'll check the focus on this lens. First I just want to put a bit of grease on the lens thread here for the front group, or the front element rather, because this is only a triplet. I'm just using some synthetic grease here. You could use helical grease, but this will work nicely. Just blow any dust that may settled in there out of the way. Get this lens started in the thread. Yeah, it's screwing in nicely. Now generally you'll find that your infinity focus will be somewhere close to the position where the lens is screwed all the way in, typically within about a rotation of that. So if I start about there, that's 3/4 of the rotation away. I wouldn't be at all surprised if that's where my infinity focus position is. So to check the focus, set the aperture to full aperture, f3.5 in this case, cock the shutter. You want a cable release. My one fortunately has got a lock in it, so it means that when I press it, the shutter stays open. Otherwise you've got to hold your finger on the button the entire time. On a focus screen, and you want a jeweler's loop. So focus screen goes here, sits on those rails. That's where the film goes. The film does not sit out on these outer pieces here, it sits on those rails. That's where you need to be. This needs to be centered in there. This focus screen came from an SLR. It's got a split image finder in the middle, which makes it very convenient for checking focus. Right, I'm going to look out the window. I've got an infinity target out the window here, and I will adjust my focus until it's correct at the film plane. Right, the focus is correct at that point for an infinity target, so I can remove my cable release. Take my focus scale ring, note where the infinity position is on this, drop that over the top of the lens and rotate it carefully round until it hits the infinity stop without disturbing the lens, and then tighten the 3 screws. And that's all there is to it. So that's setting the focus on that lens. And next, we want to look at these cameras and see about what needs to be done in order to service the camera body and what faults the camera bodies may show.